important to us as callers. Now, if you wish to maintain here and have a discussion, or would you like to hear what these two guys have to say first? Let's hear them first. Okay, we will continue with the meeting then, and I doubt that the one next tomorrow will be carried. We will probably see if we can schedule something else in there. I would probably suggest talk to John about the announcement tomorrow. There will be something in its place, but it will have to do with mainstream, and it will probably be a carry-on on the teaching program. Okay? Okay. We got two Daryls here.
I'm the good-looking one.
He's the well-fed one. The term Daryl means several things. They both come from different areas of the country together. How does that sound? About as you can get. This Daryl here is from the Washington area, Northwest Oregon, and Daryl's down in the Florida area. You can tell by the tan that he's the other Daryl. You can tell by the tan. I'm not going to tell you too much about their background. I only know them really through meeting them at CALLERLAB. They're both very effective callers and leaders in the area. They both are very effective in their training of callers and dancers. They call at all levels. I believe up to A. You go up to A, don't you?
A mainstream.
You're mainstream caller. What was that A1 dancer doing visiting my club? He claimed you were her caller.
Say what?
Yeah. Daryl, you call up to
A2 and little C1.
A2 and little C1. So these guys have been in the game for quite a number of years. And I'm very interested in what they have to say about this italicized list and the teaching of it and the teaching programs in general. So I'm going to start with the one that's closest to me, that has been up all night, hasn't had breakfast.
I finally got tea.
Daryl Clendenin.
Yeah, we're carrying on with it. That's their wish.
I had very little to say about the italicized program, other than the fact that up front it looked like it was going to be something that would be a good teaching tool by giving the caller teachers, some idea of what is actually being danced on a frequency basis out in the activity. And I didn't really oppose it for that reason. I thought that if by some way the callers could take their dancers and spend the bulk of their time teaching the new people what they were going to dance the most when they got into the activity, it would be a useful tool. Obviously, the people who have tried it have not found that it would work out that way. So I really don't know why I'm even talking about it. I didn't try it myself. I started in on a program and with my class, and then I had to leave town again for a few more dances, and where I had other callers coming in and filling in for me. Well, the whole program kind of broke down as far as trying to maintain something with the old face italicized. So I never really had any problem with anything that worked, if that makes sense. If it works for you, I would say carry on with it, but the general consensus was that it's not a good program. And really, I don't have anything more to say on it. I'm sorry.
Daryl, tell him something positive about it.
May I sit right here and tell him something? Is this okay? I don't know how many of you were in Baltimore, at our convention in Baltimore? Okay, there's only one back there and 2 or 3 of us, okay? We had a room at least twice this size and full of people. And we had run surveys all the year before. The survey that I in particular was working on was on recruiting and what could we do to better recruit people for our square dance class and this type of thing. The only common answer that I got back from every single person that answered was, we have to have a shorter teaching time. Okay, and I wanted you folks, since you were not in Baltimore, to be aware of how this list came about and why. Everybody in the room, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, if that many, voted we have to have a shorter teaching time. My next question was, fine, what do you want to leave off the list? It was unanimous in the room. Nothing. Okay, and obviously that's impossible. That is how the italicized list came about, or that's one reason it came about. And also, as you all know, we have a 25-week Learn to Dance program that includes some plus figures. The reason that one came about was exactly the same reason, except we have regions of the country where when you graduate from square dance class, if you don't dance plus, there's just no place for you to go. So these two lists were never meant to be new levels and programs for CALLERLAB. They were meant to be a teaching tool to help people get into and out of class and into club dancing, okay? So, we still, today, we have the same need. I just sent out a different survey on a completely different subject and all this, and of all the answers I've received, most of them say we've got to have a shorter teaching time. I think a lot of our callers and dancers are saying that, you know, in order to recruit, in order to get new people involved, we've got to have this. Because all of our young people these days, it takes two people just about working to make a living, the man and the wife, and they come in at night and they're tired and they don't want to get up and go anywhere. So especially they're not going to commit themselves for a year. That's one aspect to look at this thing. Now, I have a different one, which I'll probably mention again tomorrow night, but if we get people into class and we start having a class and we consider every class a dance, and we do whatever it takes to see that those people have just a great time that night, who cares if class lasts 2 years? So that, I think, is what we need to start working on, is, you know, just having a better time during class, make it a nice dance. Don't worry about, you have got to learn 7 figures tonight or we're never going to learn all this stuff in time, if we can just learn to have a good time with it. As far as the italicized list, if a person needs that type thing, I think it's excellent. The people that worked on it did a great job on it. And I'm sure that in different areas, you're set up so that I may tell you something works great, and there may be a reason why it wouldn't work at all in your area, and vice versa. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But like if you have a short teaching time and you want to use this type list, you could teach for whatever weeks, 25 weeks, and teach the italicized part. Put the people in your club, assuming you had a mainstream club, put them in there dancing, and of course you have to be aware that you cannot call those italicized figures at that time. I'm giving you an example of what I would do if I were using this particular list. And after we reach that point, the 25 weeks where we have completed the boldface figures and not the italicized one, what I would do would be start, like, let's say 30 minutes early before dance each week, and have those people come, and I would workshop 1 or 2 of those italicized figures. Now those people, and I would tell them point blank that they were not able to go off to a festival or to a dance somewhere and dance. I'd tell them why. And I try to make it as much fun as possible for those people. Workshop them 1 or 2 figures every week. I don't have any idea how many weeks it would take for them to complete the mainstream list. But again, if you show them a great time, they come just have a ball, they don't care how many weeks. So that's the only thing I have to say about that list. But it ties in with some of the other things too. Some of the people say you have to have plus and all that. I'm saying any one of these will work, and they'll work real well if that's what you try to do. But we have so many people right now that are just sitting back and saying, that won't work and this is why, and this won't work and this is why. Instead of looking at it from a positive point of view where we say, I can make this work and find a way to make it work and make it work. So my only suggestion about the whole thing is go out every night, have a good time, don't worry about it.
Your turn. My turn. Yeah. Now, as the mainstream chairman, of course, I was one of the guys that got involved in this italicized list. It was done for 2 reasons. One was to give us a starting point for what we thought might be deletions in the mainstream program. In other words, we wanted to get from the people who were involved in calling the mainstream and from the general membership what they felt should be deleted, and in the order that they were received. In other words, quantity counted. In other words, if I got 50 people wanting to italicize a certain thing, it was noted as 50, and then they were put in that order, and we selected the top end numbers for italicization. That is basically how this thing came about, and it was approved by the mainstream people as a viable program. It was intended to be a teaching list and further reference points for deletion. It did not prove out to be that. It proved to be something that people did not understand, did not use adequately, and as a result, I believe it has been removed. I agree with what Daryl, McMillan, I have trouble keeping you guys straight. I know you don't look the same.
I'm double R, he's 1 R.
You're double R, he's 1 R. So if I call you and him you're okay, eh? Okay. But as Daryl said, when you're teaching dancers, the first thing is to teach them to enjoy each other's company, to enjoy the music. The movements that you teach them each night is not the important thing. If they're not enjoying each other and enjoying what they're doing, you can't teach them anything. Because they got their back up right now. We're going to change this whole session tomorrow, just talking to John because of the motion that was made. This session tomorrow will be involved in starting with the mainstream people to design a teaching program and manual more in effectiveness with the teaching methods needed today. And we will discuss that. I've got to get something out of it. He says, get it ready. Maybe we can open the floor for a bit of discussion here on that, and then we can involve something so we can put it in the announcements tomorrow so they'll know what this session continues. Unless you have further discussions with these fellows on the italicized list. Otherwise, we're sort of beating on a dead horse. I realize this is being taped, and to those of you that buy the tape, I apologize for what we got.
And then there's a question.
Can we allow discussion?
Yes, yeah, that's what it's open for now.
I'm Walt Cooley from Pacific Grove, California. I guess Martin by now knows where I am. I've been keeping him busy all morning. I have worked with the mainstream italicized list with my mainstream club. I have worked with the 25-week combined program with my plus club. They both work. I don't really care for either one very much, frankly. And I think the problem is that even though we italicize certain moves, what's left on the list is still in more or less the traditional sequence. Unwillingly, and I will say unwillingly, I was dragged kicking and screaming because I was on the fringes of the Santa Clara Valley in California, where they have tried the experiment of using straight frequency counts from their own festival. I have tried their frequency list. The basis for it was the thing called most in the plus hall at the festival is what you teach first with some minor adjustments. And I don't think that is the right list to use. But I did learn something from trying it, which I think is important. If you indeed rearrange your teaching sequence to emphasize something resembling the most used calls in what we would call fun choreography, you do benefit a great deal in teaching time. The situation we have, there's a company in Germany, Stuttgart, Germany. I was in Switzerland for 6 years as a caller. They have books they write on learning language, and they take the German language and they say the first 40% of the language by frequency count is this. It's 200 words. The next 40% is another 2,000 words. The next 5% is another 10,000 words. If you learn about 2,200 words, you can speak the German language adequately. That's how I learned to speak it. We need to do something like that. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a frequency count at a festival, but perhaps we should make sure that in the first 15 to 20 weeks of class, we teach the moves in some resemblance to frequency of occurrence that are being used most popular for singing call figures, for example, which are published countrywide.
Can I say something about that?
Go ahead.
That would work very nicely, except for beginner dancers. If you take the frequency of use of a movement, you might be teaching recycles and scootbacks before you even teach arm turns. Your new dancers,
that's right.
You have to have a logical progression.
Now, what you have to do, I agree with you. What you have to do is first you have to decide on a source for a frequency. Then you have to go back and inject intelligence. This is high in frequency, but it has to be preceded by.
That's hard to find, isn't it?
Oh, I agree it's hard to find, but we need it. We desperately do need it.
True.
I would like to pass a comment on this too. I think what we're saying is possibly we have to be formation oriented. As was mentioned at the mainstream discussions, the major portion of our first half of the program of mainstream is circle type formations, which are not that much used today. Our formations, lines, box formations, and waves are probably the more common. The teaching progression that is used by myself and by a few callers in our area. And again, I'm not, we start talking about personal things, but the teaching progression that I use, the first night I teach them heads, lead right, veer left, and bend the line. Those are the first three movements that I will teach them. And the reason being is that we do use them as formations. A line is one. When I say heads, lead right, I've got them in that box formation. I can tell them to circle 4, one full turn around, now veer to the left. Bend the line, move up and back, 2 ladies chain them back. I've got the stuff that I'm going to teach that first night, and I've already got them into the formations that they are going to see through 90% of their dancing years. And we've got them dancing them. If you're always circling left and Allemande left and right and left grands, they're going to be a long time before they see the movements that they're going to be expected to be dancing. And I think this is the problem that we are having with our list as it is. And I'm sure that every one of you have gone over that list over the last year or 2 or 3 or whatever years you've been calling, and have gradually revised it to a teaching program that is more effective for you as a caller. I'm not saying that what I do is right. I've got about 4 different programs that I have evolved over the years for teaching newcomers, and I find that these things intermix a little bit depending on the capabilities, the age, education. There's so many things involved, and the night. Sometimes I find when there's a full moon, none of us can do anything. Daryl, have you anything further to say?
No.
Anything further from the floor?
Yep. Look at there.
Don Meyer, Fort Collins. We did use a 25-week teaching list out there, and this, being an apprentice, this was my first year to teach a class, a full class all the way through. For me, it worked good because it gave me the guidelines to work by. I only had a couple problems with the list. Crossfold was italicized. I don't know how you teach recycle without doing crossfold. So, but other than that, it worked good for us, and we graduated our class last week, and I think it's working good.
That's interesting. I've never heard that.
I think it's interesting to note that he said it worked great for him, and this was his first class. I think I heard somebody talking last week or week before last. They said that the people in most of the foreign countries, they were talking about Japan and Switzerland and Germany, that the people dance so well and our program works so well. And I personally think that it's because they look at the program we give them and say, there it is, and they use it. Just like I'll bet you he did, because he had never taught a class before. And it worked well for him. And
the use is not the problem, the abuse is the problem.
that's what I'm going to say. So many of us seem to walk out and say, okay, here's the program they designed, now let me see how I can change it. Seems like we start that way, instead of saying, here's the program that's designed, let me see how well I can make it work. So maybe our attitude might have changed. Go ahead.
Could be. Along the same lines, I did tell the class, hey, you're going to go out and dance. You're going to learn things that's not, that we haven't taught yet. That's different. We are going to do 8 weeks of workshops starting next Tuesday night for the rest of the spring. And that's where we're going to teach the rest of the list, that italicized list. And it looks like it's working pretty good.
I think you're all going to sit and look at it. Should we do a song and dance routine?
No.
I think I'll leave it.
Say something quick, or we're leaving.
No, if no one else will, I will. This is Walt Cooley again. I think the italicized program worked too. As I said earlier, I used it. The thing that I was getting to that I think is worth thinking about is you would like the dancers to dance the things they have seen and the figures they've observed and all the favorite singing calls and all the things that the club people dance as early as practical. Teaching by some adaptation, and it has to be an adaptation, of a frequency list doesn't make them full dancers in less than a year. Nothing does, as Daryl pointed out. But you reach a point, if you are very religious about trying to come up with a good frequency-related teaching sequence where you're 6 months into your class and your club people are dancing with the class people and they're not really sure what's left that hasn't been taught because it seems like everything that you're calling is what they always dance anyway. And you're not going to stop the class and graduate it and say you guys are now full, mainstream or plus dancers depending on your club. You're going to workshop them right on through a year. But that's not a class to them, because square dancers like to be looking and working on new things, and you're always workshopping anyway. But it is true, you're teaching a full year. It's just a way to make it fun, make it more fun. Not to say that it's not fun already. Maximize the fun, that's what we're looking for. Maximize it earliest, keep your dancers.
Going back to something else Daryl said, you have to cut something someplace. Something's got to give. You can only get 5 pounds in a 6-pound sack, right? Or 6 pounds in a 5-pound sack.
It depends what you're packing in.
You've got to get 10 pounds in a... Well, forget that. No. Really, if you're going to have a shoulder teaching program, you're going to have to cut something someplace, aren't you? Don't you have to give up something? If you don't give it up in the number of movements, you're going to have to give it up in the number of formations that you use, or the number of arrangements that you use, or something. You're going to have to cheat on the time that you devote to teaching each movement as you go through the program. Either that, or you're going to have your 42-week program. They want a 25-week program. They already said that, didn't they? Over and over and over. And right now, if you go out there and ask them, they'll say that they want a shorter teaching program. They want a way to get their dancers into the mainstream of the activity quicker. We as callers, don't we have to give up something that maybe we're calling for our own enjoyment sometimes in order to accomplish that? Are we going to have to bend? Are we going to have to back up a little bit and say, well, I can actually live without 3 of these movements, or some of the combinations, some of the in-depth choreography that we feel is so important? Is it all that important to the dancers, or is it more important to ourselves? Just some questions. Go ahead and argue with me. You don't have to agree. We got a whole tape to fill up.
In some ways I agree with Daryl. In other ways I have to say, well, a parallel. Let's look at this. I don't know how many of you have grandchildren and how many of you have young children. I do know that I have a grandson that's 7 years old, and the school system is now teaching him to count in other bases than 10. And he's proficient in adding, subtracting, and multiplying in all the bases through from 1 through to 10. How many of us at 7 years old in the standard school ever learned that? And this is math. And if you look at your teaching programs in your schools today, they are teaching thousands of things that we never saw in our school years, and we felt we were overloaded in school then. But these kids are dealing with it, and they're being taught adequately in most cases. Not in all cases. It depends on the qualifications of the teachers. And I think we as caller leaders have to look at how we're teaching as well as what we're teaching and when we teach what. We can go down that list and say, this is the order in what it's taught. But yet sometimes I think we have to look at that list and say, it was good for that period of time. But our choreographic structure has changed since that list was published. And if you read the list and you read what it says right on it, it says this is a recommended teaching program, a recommended teaching order. And this is the thing that has been coming to light in the correspondence that I've had with the mainstream people and with other portions of the square dance program, is that we are out of order, out of line with what is being danced, not so much material-wise, but in the progression in which we are teaching, because we cannot take our dancers to a Christmas party with our mainstream club and have both groups enjoy it, because we have spent the first 15 weeks teaching them how to circle left, do Alaman left and Alaman bars, ladies in the men's sachet, things like this that do not tie in with the current choreography. You can do a square through, swing through, right and left through, this type of thing. You can do these type of movements with your general club, and if your music is good and the spirit is good, they can enjoy those beginners dancing. You don't have to get involved with them. And this is the point that I'm getting at. If you can get them dancing and enjoying everything, and it isn't a class, it's almost another club.
I think maybe we're going to get some discussion out of this. You never know.
I was going to sit and keep my mouth shut, but I guess not. My name's Tim Taylor from Portland, Oregon, and this is my first convention, which had been real educational to this point. One thing I think that I haven't heard said, I sat through both mainstream sessions this morning and this discussion today, and it's talking about, I think the thing we've left out, one thing important, is who we're teaching. Everybody's saying, okay, well, mainstream committee said come up and put a recommended 60-hour teaching time on the mainstream program. Figure out how to do that. That was, I think, the last thing we did before we bailed out of there. But you've got to consider the people, their ability to learn.
That's right.
Children are in a learning mode. They learn very easily. Right. Sometimes if you have a lot of older people in your club, it takes a little bit longer. I know you have to adjust teaching sequences and moves sometimes depending on the physical ability of the people that are involved. And I don't think we can stick a label and say, this is how you're going to do it. I think it has to be a guideline.
Yes.
And I mean, these are some general things to get you through. And I know I've played around. I got a copy of the italicized list from Daryl with the short R, and I used it for one of my with one R. I used it in my class, and I had some success with it. But the problem is that in our area it was not being done uniformly, and as such I didn't hold to it for that much longer because I wanted the dancers out and dancing with other clubs in the area at jamborees. And in order to do that, they have to be adhering to some kind of a uniform teaching program where everybody's progressing at the same note. The way we do it in the Northwest is all of our beginners jamborees, as we call them, are advertised at a dance level off this list. 1 through 48 plus turn through. I know I do it. I skip around in the list when I teach, especially in the very beginning. There are some things like do paso that I leave for several weeks. And I get up to a lot of other things that I may teach. I may be all the way up to lead rights and bend the lines on the first 3 nights. It depends on the group of people and what you've got, the material you have to work with, and how it falls together. And I'm glad to see the session tomorrow. I know it was something that you wanted to accomplish, in the mainstream meetings. I'm glad to see taking on the idea of restructuring perhaps the teaching order, because I really think that's what we need to address. All right, thank you.
John Quaiser from Loveland, Colorado. Martin made a statement that's worth analyzing just a little bit. We talk about the young kids learning at a much quicker rate and in different means than we learned, and you have to stop and think they're being taught differently too. Mm-hmm. So maybe if we sit back and analyze how we're teaching and try a new approach, we're going to be able to teach a little bit quicker too, and the people are going to be able to grasp what we're trying to get across to them. Because what we used with our last class last year or 2 years ago, we might have a different age group or just a different ability of learning and grasping. If we analyze our class in the first few weeks and rethink our teaching methods, we may be able to get them through a lot quicker too.
Don Williams from Michigan. I've taught a lot of classes, and majority of them were the full CALLERLAB list. When the italicized come out, I tried that, and when the 25-week come out, I tried that. I call it plus, I call it advance, and I still work, and I don't have time to separate all them list. I guess I've got enough brains to do it. So I simply had to drop the italicized and the 25 and teach the regular list. Because I get up calling on the 25 list, I dumped some of the other ones in there. I knew it was wrong as soon as the floor stopped, but I just can't remember all those. Picking them out. So I just used the entire list.
Have a motion for adjournment? Yes. Have a motion for adjournment? Maybe. Thank you.
Well, I want you to think about it. John will make some announcement either tonight, well, it won't be tonight, it'll be tomorrow morning at breakfast, concerning what's going to happen to this session tomorrow. It may be whitewashed entirely, or we'll have to tie in, because if we do what we're talking about, we're going to be overlapping with the Education Committee and with one of the Teaching Committee and this type of thing, and it may be that it should be dropped at this point and brought up for later discussion at one of the other conventions, or carried on to the mail with the mainstream committee. In either way, you will be informed.
Y'all go enjoy one of the other sessions, and thank you for coming in.
Sorry, there wasn't more to fight about.
You always teach us to
I run my own beginner class.
Unfortunately, that's what last time we teach, I say nothing. That means we get an hour and a half.
Last fall. I did it at one club. I have some good fellow north of us, but they couldn't afford to.
Last time I cruised,
What we did it a couple of years ago. We taught one tip to newcomers, and we did a review. That's what we do. We looked from both ends of the program.
That's in effect what I'm doing.
And it was actually amazing. I think it was 3. I could give you the whole history. This group went out, they went out a few squares. And they went out and they did a paper stack. Safeways and so forth, all over together. They sent a mailer out to everybody in town. This time about 55,000.
few years ago.
And they rounded up 11 squares.
We're all set up for Mexico.
So we were teaching these 11 squares for one tip, and then dancing on the 3 squares for one tip. And this went slowly together. And at about halfway through the program, they were dancing together then for the whole evening. So by Christmas time, the Christmas party, we were halfway through our mainstream program, and we just continued on reviewing again. Because those people needed that review.
That's in effect what I'm doing with one club right now. I'm kind of glad to see that somebody
But you know what the clincher in the whole thing was? 2 years later, we had lost about a third of those people as dancers. So I don't think the program was effective. They did not feel that they had been adequately taught. And we talked to some of them about it, and they said, well, it was fun, but we seemed to be pressured. We never had the fun. We were being watched. We were being led, and we were being hit. And this was their comment.
Do they get the feeling that the club doesn't accept them?
That's right. What we've finally done now in our own area, we actually have built a hall in our home, which can handle 8 squares. So we run our classes right there as a separate entity. And the clubs have no say in it. We run them ourselves, and when we tell them when they graduate, they graduate.
2 years ago, I graduated 16 squares. Graduated 12 squares out of 16 as I started. Biggest class I ever taught, and I really felt good about it. And then 5 squares joined the club, and I said, now, something wrong here. I don't know what I've done or what somebody else.
The other ones do.
And then 3, well, some of them spread out to other clubs, and very few of them. And then 6 months later, of the 5 squares that joined, there's a square and a half of them left.
Yeah, here comes the introduction.
This is a replacement of mainstream Italics.
Okay. This portion of the taping has been replaced by a program sort of off the cuff on teaching methods, possible different positions in the listing of the mainstream program. The italicized portion of the listing has been deleted by mainstream, so this session has been set up to do such. We have with us Daryl McMillan and Daryl Clendenin and Martin Mallard as the moderator. And we have about 20 people sitting around here. We're going to just have a panel, gab session, whatever you want to call it, on various teaching methods and the possibilities of what we can do with the listing of the calls. Daryl, you started talking a few minutes ago. Would you like to reiterate?
No, I think there's a long enough cord we can.
You got to get away from me now.
Let's make a certain stuff.
A little tighter. We started before the microphone. What I did say was, as far as the teaching order, or the sequence of movements as we teach them, there are only 2 basic reasons why we have a teaching order to begin with. Number 1, to give the caller who's really not sure what he should or shouldn't be teaching first, some kind of an idea of a method that does work, a teaching order that will work or should work. The idea that he can't deviate from that's ridiculous, of course. Everybody does. The second reason is to give the areas some way to control the level of their new dancer, halfway hoedowns, quarter hoedowns, jamborees, whatever they're called. So those are 2 valid reasons for having a teaching order. I question, and I will probably continue to question, the need to once again go over the teaching order and change it. It's only a recommended teaching order. I see no reason to change it. Slight variations here and there can always be made. The end.
Let's see, who's... Give your name.
Jack Murray, Albuquerque, New Mexico. What you said is valid in New Mexico. We do beginner hoedown starting at about the 4th week of lessons, and we use the teaching order to establish the levels of each hoedown. I was happy with the teaching order until yesterday when Martin brought up the fact that he gets people in lines the first night and gets them in box formations the first night and introduces them to the various formations, and I hadn't even given any thought to the fact that we do 30% of our teaching in the early stage, and we're all in circles for almost the entire time. So I kind of like what Martin said yesterday about the getting people into lines and box formations and introducing them to the other formations earlier in the game. So I support the idea of rearranging this thing a little bit.
Have we any other comments?
Walt Cooley, Pacific Grove, California. I think the list needs to be rearranged, the suggested teaching order, because one, it is a guide to people to teach, and some depend on the guide. I first started square dancing when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I don't remember a whole heck of a lot of what I did then, but I do remember that we did a lot of stuff like, pass through, separate, around, and down the middle. We did a lot of figures like this, and if you go back to our existing recommended teaching sequence, all the traditional moves are grouped more or less first, then a whole slug of moves that came out in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which was pretty much when the growth period started. Yet, you look at what we're doing today and what the dancers enjoy doing, go next door and look at all the singing calls that are out there. And a lot of callers use singing calls without deviating from the script because it's there and it's written. And all the good singing calls are grouped. I guess one of the most popular singing call figures that you find printed is promenade halfway, square through, right and left through, veer left, Ferris wheel, square through 3, swing your corner. I think there is a benefit to getting a much larger proportion of the very common high-frequency figure-oriented moves like the swing-throughs and the runs and the Ferris wheels and stuff like that much earlier in the program, ahead of the Alamandars and a lot of these things. Not that Alamandar is bad, but as long as you have some basic circle lefts, Alamand lefts, dos in this thing, and as long as you teach some of the derivative moves, the moves you need to get to the swing-throughs, you could get into more of a core of what people enjoy dancing today sooner. And that adds to the fun. And it gets the people dancing those moves earlier, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise to go through.
I'd like to inject something in here to what Walt is saying. There is a reason for the more traditional stuff at the beginning, in my feeling anyways. By the way, Martin Mallard, so people know who the heck's talking. The traditional movements do give the caller a chance to train the dancer to listen. And you can train a dancer to listen much easier if he is doing things that he is comfortable with doing in the first part. It has to be simple so that the training of the ear to coordinate with the body is there. And we need that coordination. Square dancing is one of the few recreations that actually coordinates the ear and the body. It does not necessarily rely on sight. If you stop to think of every other type of sport that we do, or recreation, it involves the coordination of the eye and the body. Square dancing coordinates the ear and the body more than anything else. There is a slight corresponding to the eye and the body, but not as much, or to the eye and the body, but not as much. And the simpler movements do give you that coordination early. But I do feel that the positioning that you use, like as I spoke about in the mainstream committee meetings, of heads lead right, circle up for a full turnaround, veer left, bend the line, these types of things can be used very early in your game to establish the various formations. And I do make a point of it when we're teaching beginners to let them know what formation they are in. Give them the general name of it so that later if you want them into a formation to teach something, you don't have to go through a lengthy get-in situation. You can say, heads, would you step in the middle, turn and face your corner, and set up a box 1-4 or a box formation so that they know what you're talking about. And you can give them this. The other thing is, too much time is often spent on teaching and not enough time in smiling. We've got to get the dancers happy, and part of that happiness is giving them comfortable, flowing, easy movements. We don't want to get in there the first night and teach them swing through, boys, run, wheel and deal, things like that. No. They may be very current, may be very up to date and everything, but if you can set up these formations momentarily so that they're there and use your teaching, still using the first part of it. If you're going to teach them circle left from ahead's lead right. Circle left, one full turn around. Now circle right, the other way around. That type of thing. But you have established those two couples dancing. You can start with your circle 8, but you've got your circle 4 now. You've also got your box formation starting there. And this is what I was talking about when I said maybe some of these things can be changed. The present list works, and I don't think there's a caller here that doesn't go down that list and move some of them. But that line right at the top says this is a recommended, and this is the thing that you have to take and generate with.
I'm going to take it way down here. Who was up first here? I think you were next. Pass it down.
Okay, I'm Frank Davis from Fort Mill, South Carolina, and I may be one of the callers that deviated from the list of teaching order last year. I do for the first 6 weeks usually try to stick with the basic calls at the very beginning. But then I moved to my square throughs and swing throughs and spin the tops and this type thing up in the teaching order, mainly for one purpose. I found that those calls get very little practice through the year if you leave it at the end of the teaching order. And therefore, by moving it up, I've had 2 years of good, successful teaching, letting them practice those calls. But if you leave it in the old sets and order teaching order, they're going to have about 3 or 4 weeks of practice, and then they're out in the square dance world. So it's worked very successful for me for the last 2 years.
Lee McNutt from Sacramento, California, and in our association we have a complete list of all the way through the mainstream, 1 through 5 on 1 week, 1 through 7 in the next week, and so forth and so on. And every 5th Saturday, when the 5th Saturday comes around, well, we have a 5th Saturday dance for new dancers, all the way from I think it's November or the end of October until June, until it's their graduation time through the mainstream. And they seem to get along real good with it. It's a list that anybody can use, and it works. So if it works, why fix it?
Pardon? Yeah.
Rusty Wright, Santa Fe, New Mexico. My first question is, why do we have more dancers smiling the first 3 nights when they don't know anything than we do after that? The second one is, in our area, our emphasis is to try to cover everything within a program before you go on to a next program. Therefore, we cover everything in the basics before we start teaching any of the mainstream at all. There are some deviations and variations within each of the programs, but other than that, we try to get everything covered within a program before we go to the next program. And I believe that there are some things that would be nice to take out of mainstream and move down into basics. I mean, what's so hard about doing a hinge? And there are some things that I think would be nice if you just took them out of basics and moved them up into mainstream. Thank you.
You're going to zap me with that, I know.
Tim Taylor from Portland, Oregon. One thing I kind of wanted to touch on is something that Martin said. I use the list. I do adjust it as necessary, but I do that depending upon the class of people that I'm teaching. What I see is important for the very basics things is teaching some of the dancers. We've got to set them up. We're teaching them a whole new language and a whole new series of things that most of them don't know, and for establishing some basic formation awareness of the dancers so they know who a corner is, where a corner is. This is what I use the circle moves and things for. Depending on my class, I may move up the list if I got a bunch of young kids and they're quick learners. I could be up into chains and everything, the first evening. Similar to what you do in a one-night stand situation. If you've got people that are not so quick at learning and you've got some people that take more time, then you have to back off on that. You have to adjust it. And but I have no objection with the list as it exists. It works. It's worked real well. I've taught 5 classes so far. I'm new at this, my first year here. But it does work for me, and I've had good success with that. And if anything, probably some kind of a teaching tool I know for the newer caller, when I was doing it, I was very fortunate to have a number of callers in our area that would let me sit in on their classes, and I could watch them teach, and they would let me help teach. And I felt very fortunate to have that happen. And a lot of people don't have that advantage. And as a result, you've got to go looking for the information where you can. I use the Sets in Order Caller Teacher Manual because it is the only manual available for that. But there's a lot of information in there that's outdated. I don't use. I rearrange the order. I use things differently. I also like to do, you mentioned the fun aspect of it, and that's one thing we got to kind of remember is what we're really doing with square dancing is we're selling fun. I use singing calls from the first night out. I take singing call records, and I mean, if I'm only doing circle lefts and circle rights and Alamans and right and left grands, I get those people out there, get them dancing, get them smiling. And we got to remember, they don't know that there's a swing through if we haven't taught it. The new dancers don't know that. There's no real need to have to complicate it. They can have fun and enjoy it, dancing what they know. You back off 10% from where they're competent and let them have fun with it during the singing call. Let the dancers win. And doing that, I've had classes that move well, and I retain, good percentages of the classes, and it seems to work.
I don't want to sit up there. Rusty, right again. I knew there was 3 things I wanted to cover, and I left one of them out. My personal feeling is one of the things that we really want to do at the very beginning of our classes is we don't want to teach them to execute. We want to teach them to dance. And it's very hard to teach people to dance to the music when only half of them are doing something, like a swing through or a spin the top. Okay? And when you have something where everybody's moving together, it's a lot easier to teach them to dance to the music. And hopefully you get it instilled in them before they get to the things that it's very hard to do, dancing to the music. And by the way, I graduated my 38th class last week.
Reno from Yuma, Arizona. I have to agree with Daryl. There's Clendenin. Clendenin. McMillan hasn't said anything yet. Okay, I agree with you anyway, whatever it is. I think there's nothing wrong with the list that we have. I don't care if we made up a new list. The same amount of people would use the list that we make up who's using the list now. The ones that's not going to use the list, not going to use the list. I'm one that don't use the list. If all the callers in our area did, I would, in order to, get together for the beginner hoedown. So I agree with him fully that we ourselves are talking a lot, but I think we're wasting our time.
One thing that we've got to keep in mind on this whole doggone thing here is, even though none of these lists are carved in granite tablets or anything like that, we do have an obligation to CALLERLAB's credibility, believe it or not. If you start making major changes in your teaching order, you know what's going to be said around the world? There they go again. They can't leave anything alone. We just got to where we were comfortable with this, and it's working for us, and they got to change it again. That's important. Now, it's not more important than the activity. It's not more important than your classes or anything else, but it is important, and we've got to keep that in mind. And somehow, I don't know why, but sometimes I get the feeling that when they say, gee, we've got to get them through these other things to where they can get to the good stuff, or the stuff that everybody's having fun with. When you talk about the stuff everybody's having fun with, and when you're talking about the mainstream dancers, those are the people who graduated. The experienced dancer, they've got all these years behind them. Sure, but what makes that any better? It's not better. Better is how well you're calling what you're calling, how much fun, enthusiasm, all those things that you're putting into it. Not the material. The choreography, the material is just one of the tools we use to do our job, gang. It's not the job.
I'm here because I want to speak here.
Well, I was going to let you. Promise.
No, I never use microphone stand. limits my movement. Okay, Betsy Gata from New Jersey. And no, I don't know how to use a microphone stand. It's never been recommended in caller school. I have a specific figure, trades, which I would like to see moved so that it would be before swing through, because I find that if you teach the arm turn trade before swing through, it makes for a smoother progression and better dancing teaching. Period.
Yeah, my name is Daryl. My name is Larry. I'd like you to meet my brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl. No, it's Rusty Wright again. Although I'd like to see the list changed. If they don't change it, it's not going to stop my square dance world. I just make the normal adjustments that I make. You know, I lie to my dancers sometimes because hinge is so far down the list. I just teach them how to do a touch a quarter when they really can't do touch a quarter because they're already touching. And then when I do hinge, I say, by the way, guys, I lied to you. And they laugh about it and they think it's funny, but it works. Thank you.
Lee McNutt from Sacramento. We tend to do a swing through in our area with palms up. Another area does it with an arm turn, right? So which is right?
I know it comes up every time.
We talked about that several years ago. Walt Cooley, Pacific Grove, California. I'm one of those who'd like to see the list changed, but I have to agree that it's not a good idea to have a lot of change coming out of CALLERLAB. The existing teaching sequence works. I've used it for 20 some odd classes with success, but for the last several years the word has kept coming out of votes from the General Assembly of CALLERLAB saying come up with italicized lists, come up with 25-week teaching programs, come up with a way to shorten it. And my point in remarks I'm making is simply that if indeed there is a desire to come up with a faster progression, then I think the existing sequence doesn't do that job, and there must be a better sequence, whether it's frequency-based or whatever, that does it. And if we don't need it now, I can live without it. I can't give you the feedback. I call for 4 clubs, and 2 of them are in one association and 2 are in another. And I found myself in the enviable position this last year where one association voted to use the 25-week combined teaching sequence and the other one voted to use a frequency-based system. And I had a few people who came to both classes. And I got very strong feedback from my beginner dances that the frequency-based one was the most fun. But I'll go with whatever everyone else wants to go with.
Tim Taylor again from Portland. I don't know. I don't think the list is broken, and I stole this. It's not mine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is kind of the way I feel about it. But one thing, and this may not be the place to do it, but maybe we can recommend to whatever group within CALLERLAB is responsible for doing these things. I would like to see a curriculum guide established for the caller teaching mainstream classes, similar to the curriculum guide that they've come out with for caller training. Something up to date and current. What we have to work with is 20, 25 years old. And if there's any effort that I think CALLERLAB could take, it would be something along, an up-to-date curriculum guide.
There is a teaching guide which is available. It's from, I believe, Sets in Order, published it with Bob Osgood. Yeah, this is the one. That's the big fat one. You're not okay. Yeah. There is a newer one now, is there? Okay. I'd like to answer that question about hands up, hands down. CALLERLAB recommends hands up. Period. We know that there are areas that don't, but that is a local type thing. As the moderator of this thing, I think we should maybe start a little bit of discussion for the people that are here on perhaps teaching methods that will help. I know that some of you have problems with courtesy turns and square throughs. That's always been a problem. Maybe you have some gimmick that helps on that type of thing. I'm going to ask a question. How many ever teach their dancers the concept of spin? It's not a recognized movement. But if you explain to them when you're teaching, maybe spin the top, the concept of spin, and anytime you hear spin is always the ends turn half, the centers turn 3/4. You got half your problem licked anytime you teach any spin movement. And if you do that type of thing, you examine what you're teaching, and maybe there's some little concept in that. I call it conceptual teaching. And I'm seeing more dancers, more callers talking about that particular idea in their teaching. And when you have a concept coming, it will assist you with your later movements if you can get it to your dancers.
I'm Red Hen, and I guess I'm from where I want to be from. I'm full-time RVing. I spend the summers in Michigan, and I spent the winter this one in Arizona. I have a little conflict with the 25-year-old list when I see Past the Ocean. I think it came down in 1965. That's an interesting call, because if you pass through and partner hinge, you pass the ocean, basically. So our teaching order frequently has some calls we use on a basic lower level of the list, that if partner hinge was moved down, past the ocean would be easy. The other thing I do that's been successful for me was when you first teach the right and left through, beginning dancers panic and they always hold on to hands and throw the poor lady clear out of sight. I teach them to pass through and courtesy turn, and it takes a long time before I actually tell them to grab that right hand and do a right and left through, and it's been very successful.
Tell us about the South, Daryl. Tell us about the South.
No one else, then I'll throw in another one. Walt Cooley, Pacific Grove. Maybe you haven't all run into this problem, but I notice in a lot of classes that I always have a percentage, and it's not all the newer dancers, it's always just a few, but there's a percentage that have a great deal of difficulty adjusting to having the ladies facing in the opposite direction of the gentleman next to her, and vice versa. The turnaround problem, where as soon as people see themselves in a something resembling a mini wave or an ocean wave, they want to turn around. I think the traditional sequence of teaching swing-throughs contributes to the problem. We teach do-side-o to a wave, we get into swing-throughs, then we get into runs, then we get into, we wheel and deal or we bend the line. I find that the teaching goes much smoother and the people seem to enjoy it more if you start right out after they've learned start through and pass through, and you get boxes, you start through, pass through, you make lines. You teach run immediately, starting with the boys. The ladies slide over while the boys run. Then the girls run while the boys slide over. They're now pacing in lines. They're back to something they recognize. Pass through, do it again. Ladies run, boys run. I do that for a night. I throw in centers trade with the left hand, ends trade with the right hand. And we don't do swing through for another week or two, but we do runs and trades in line formations very early, and these people immediately recognize that there's nothing at all wrong with being facing in the opposite direction or having your partner on the, quote, wrong side, and it flows and you have a lot of fun. And these are some of the things that I think small adjustments in teaching, which maybe don't even have to be on a recommended sequence, but which would be sure nice to have around. People might benefit.
I'm going to make a statement you've all heard me. I'm Daryl McMillan from Lynn Haven, Florida. I'm going to make a statement you've all heard me say before, and I think it's pertinent to this group. I think it's pertinent to the mainstream group and all these groups that we have meeting this morning just about. I personally feel that I heard somebody make a statement a minute ago that if you do this and if you do that and all this kind of stuff, and that's all well and good. But I personally feel from the first night, if you go out there for one reason only, just to have a good time that night, I don't think it matters if we have classes 25 weeks, 50 weeks, or 200 weeks. If they have a good time every night, they're going to come back. And having said that, I want to go into a little teaching thing. Somebody give me the definition as close as you can of a recycle. The comment from the state of Oregon, we'd like to put this on the tape. The comment from the Oregon, the definition of recycle is grab her hand and pull her around.
Okay? Ends, the definition given is the ends cross-fold, the ends fold, follow, and roll. Centers, centers fold, follow, and roll. Isn't that correct? Huh? Okay. Fold and follow. You can't say roll. Okay. Point being this, okay? If you try to tell your dancers, the centers, if you try to say exactly what you said and get them through it, I think it's going to be quite complicated. I'd like to give you one little hint that I've been using for a long time. And you may think it's right, you may not think it's right, but it works great for me. And in the class situation, the first night that I teach recycle, I can have boys on the end, girls on the end, mixed. They do it fine, doesn't matter. Now, after I graduate them and they've danced 2 months, they can't do it anymore. But in class, when I start teaching recycle, first of all, I've already taught run, I've already taught fold, I've already taught cross fold. Some, maybe weeks before, I wouldn't say the same night, weeks before. But when I start teaching recycle, I tell them for teaching purposes only, put them in a standard way, boys on the end. I tell the boys, don't move as you normally would in a run situation if a girl is running around you. I tell the boys, just keep your feet right where they are. I tell the ladies to run right twice. And I say, now you just came right back where you were. You're in exactly the same place you were a few minutes ago. Okay, we're through with that. I tell the boys to cross-fold and face the lady down there, and I said, you girls may take a little step back. And then I do whatever I want to from there, like a star through, put them in lines, and whatever. I do this several times, and then I put them back in the same type ocean way, and I say, okay, boys, in a minute, you're going to cross-fold down to the right and face that lady just like you did a minute ago. Girls, you're going to run to the right twice as if that man were there. He's going to be moving, he's not going to be there. But you're going to run in that same little circle, and you'll be about a foot back from where you are right now. And I say, okay, everybody do your part. It just goes smooth as glass. They do it perfect. There are no hands. There's no pulling around. You can do exactly the same thing with boys in the center. First night, it does not confuse them, and it just seems to work real good for me. That's the way we do it down south.
Marv Lindner from Yuma, Arizona. I'm doing my best. Okay. On your recycle, I do similar to what he does. Like I teach the cross-fold. Whoever's on the end, cross-fold. But I've used lately, this last year, that the center person do the leading portion of a zoom. While the ends are cross-folding, the centers do the leading part of a zoom, and I've already taught zoom. And I get them to do it quite easily that way. Do you guys find anything wrong with that? Okay. I hope not, because it works, Okay.
Only in Arizona?
No, that's probably true.
Walt Cole from Utah and Arizona. One thing I have not heard in any of the teaching is the time. Recycle is a 4-beat movement. If you tell a person to run twice, he's done at 8 beats. Because run is a 4-beat. And I always instruct the student dancer that this movement takes 8 beats, or it takes 10 beats, or it takes 4 beats. I don't expect them to memorize this, but I want them to have a concept that some movements take more beats than other movements. And if you teach this recycle, for instance, Daryl, and say the centers run twice, this is 8 beats, while the ends are doing a 4-beat movement. And then when you call it and expect everybody to do a 4-beat movement, and these are out here learned in an 8-beat movement, then it doesn't jibe. Same token, we would not put up with this sort of stuff in round dance. If we say circle away in 4, we mean 4. And if we circle together in 4, we mean 4. So in none of this teaching have I ever heard anyone refer to the timing it takes to execute the movement. No more, no less. And CALLERLAB does have a timing chart out. Use it.
Just run a little bit faster, though.
They run slower in the south.
Jack Murray, Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm sorry, thought you were finished. Betsy said something interesting about teaching trade. before the swing through, and that's interesting, but if you take trade and look at all the ramifications in it, you can't teach it all at one time. And I think this is one thing we need to look at, not necessarily in the teaching order, but in a manual, where we break these calls down. A lot of the calls, you get down to circulate, and when I first started learning to dance, circulate was taught in one night, right? And an ocean wave, and you did the center circulate, the end circulate, and that's it. But now when you've got split circulate and box circulate and column circulate and all the rest of the circulate, you can spend 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks just teaching circulate and teaching it properly. So I think maybe this is what we need to do in the manual. Maybe this manual needs to be reviewed and updated and take some of these calls and break them down, the families, and break them down and put them in the proper place so that a new caller, particularly when he's learning to teach, can teach properly and adequately.
The present listing, of course, is a family listing more than a progression teaching listing, and I believe you will find that even the present listing, as we recognize it, has some italicization for later teaching. This was one of the reasons for the italicized list, was to generate some things that could be sort of taught at a different time. The idea fell through because we weren't deep enough into it and giving the general point as when it should be taught. I have had letters from people that say, well, I teach right on the list. And what you said is right. I've got one guy that teaches all the circulates in one night. I can believe that if he lost half his dancers that night, he deserved it. And so 3 of them are italicized, right, Betsy? But I'm not going to use names, but that's the type of thing that some of the feedback we have had of people when I get these lists in, this is what they're saying. I can't believe that this is what's going on. And this is one of the reasons why we're talking about teaching methods, maybe some reorganization. I do think we can leave the list the way it is, but I do think that maybe some direction of teaching methods and the usage of some of these things are much needed, particularly for the newer caller.
Rusty Wright again. I think that all of us here are basically what everybody would classify as old callers. It's just like Daryl, some are just a lot older than others. I think the list is probably less important for us than it is for the newer caller, or, as in our area, the isolated caller. We have callers that there is nobody else within 200 miles of where they live. They are it. And when these guys first started, all they got is this list in their hands, and they just went right down the list. And I never thought I'd ever say this, but maybe what we do need to have is actually 2 different lists. I have a list of all the basics, and this is what they are, but it would be nice to have a list of the basics as they should be taught, ignoring families. It would be nice to have this for our new callers, because they're influencing a lot of new dancers.
I'm Dottie Swenson from Portland, Oregon. And one of the things that bothers me is when I'm using my teaching list, and this is strictly for the benefit of the caller who's teaching, I don't teach men go into the middle and make a right-hand star, and then ladies make a right or left-hand star. And at the same time, turn around and teach heads go into the middle and make a star. And when I've already checked off stars for one thing, then I have no place to check off stars for another thing. So for that reason, I would like to see a little difference in the star part of the teaching list, just to allow another place to check it off. Not to add anything different, but another place to check it off only. It's only the 8th thing down on the list.
My name's Gordon Melton. I'm from Twin Oaks, California. I'd like to see something done to encourage the areas to stick more to the list instead of having completely different lists. Right now I'm teaching a class and have a club in Los Banos, California, and you go right over the hill to the Santa Clara Valley Association. They're going by 3 different lists over there. My beginners cannot go over and dance with their beginners and vice versa. They're teaching completely different order. They're not teaching different calls, but in completely different order. I'd like to see something to encourage the
all the areas to go back to what we had before, where everybody tries to stick with more or less the same list, so each dancer can go all over and dance. I've told my dancers a number of times, you learn to dance by this list, you can go any place in the United States and dance, and they can't go right over the hill and dance.
I'm Daryl McMillan. In answer to what you just said, I think we have done exactly what you said, with one exception, and that is we have put out a list that we recommended that everybody teach at various levels. That's our recommendation. Okay, we did not, none of us went to the Santa Clara Valley Caller Association and said, please come up with another list and teach it. This is something they're doing. By the same token, if you want to make a change, there's not a thing we can do about that. We are not a, what's the right word? We're not a police force. And we...
I said something to impose.
That's what I said, police. Anyway, we have no authority to tell anybody that they can or cannot do something. We sit here in a group, and this is something I'm going to talk about tonight. As a majority, we can vote to do something. We can discuss it as we're doing right now, and when somebody comes up with an idea and it sounds pretty good, and we might want to bring it to a vote, in a proper place, and everybody or a group votes for it. What we've had in the past, that I've seen 1,000 times, and I bet you have too, if you disagree, jump up and down right quick. 65%, 70% vote for something. It passes. We put it in the program. The 30% that did not vote for it walk right out there in the hall and say, I don't care what they vote, I'm going to do this. This is the attitude that we need to get away from. And it's not something we can force on anybody. So I would love to see exactly what you just said. But we have had the list, and we've recommended it for a long, long time, and I don't see that we have any authority to do anything other than that with that situation.
I didn't say force them. I said something to entice people to stick.
Maybe I can clear it up for you, okay? Since I'm from the Bay Area. I'm Wayne Jansen from Castro Valley, so is Pat. What you're referring to is what we came up with called the Bay Area Teaching Order. Okay. Now, the list that came out last year out of New Orleans, we had 3. One was the italicized bowl, and then we had the 25-week. Now, the 25-week is really what ended up being the Bay Area Teaching Order. Okay. And it was, again, on a trial basis for 1 year. Some of the clubs tried it, some of the callers tried it, some did not. Some went to the boldface and italicized, some stuck to the regular list. So we had 3 lists going in our particular area, the San Jose area, Santa Clara Valley, and in the Bay Area, Northern California, Caller Association, okay? But that was only for 1 year. It was strictly for a trial basis, and anything that came of that is supposed to be discussed in the general session. Because I'm sure they're going to be asking, what feedback do you have for those 3 lists that we gave you in New Orleans to try? See what the difficulties came of them. Now, I personally, I stick to the list. I didn't have a class last year. I had a plus workshop for my previous 2 classes because they had difficulty in the plus, so I really hammered at that. But the callers that I associated with and went to the newer dances, most of them kept to the basics, but they also watched the Bay Area Teaching Order, because if their dancers were going to the Bay Area Teaching Order, they had to make sure that they had those particular ones covered, because as soon as Pat advertised it in her magazine, we would know how far on the basic teaching order they were going to be calling that night. So if he hadn't covered it, he damn well covered it in the next 2 weeks so that his people then could go over there. But if you don't get the book and you don't have the list, you can't make it. Thank you.
Dorothy Genti, San Jose, California. I wanted to make 2 comments. One comment about the mainstream list as it exists right now, concerning the bold-faced and italics. If that's supposed to be a teaching order, it is not a teaching order, because you just finished saying that the italics are supposed to be taught at a later time. Well, what later time? That's not even a teaching order. If you're supposed to follow that teaching order, then the italics are supposed to be taught with the boldface, but you're not supposed to, so it's not really a teaching order. My other comment I'm from the Santa Clara Valley Colors Association that developed the list that you were mentioning. And there's not 3 lists in our Colors Association. There's only 1 list. And CALLERLAB has been muddling around trying to come up with a good list for the past, I think, 3 years. And so our own Colors Association did a frequency study at our major festival and came up with a teaching order including all the mainstream and plus calls of the calls that, to teach the calls first that are used the most, with the most frequency. The Color Association decided in September for all the clubs and all the colors in our association to use that list for the September classes, and we all did that. When we have Saturday night dances, they're advertised in the book that they're according to that list, and the numbers are advertised. What calls, 1 through whatever, will be called at that dance. The other side, we're on the west side of San Francisco Bay. The east side of the bay has the other teaching list, the BADO, Bay Area Teaching Order. It was the list that Kip Garvey came up with, which I think it's a little different than that 25-week, because that includes all the mainstream and plus calls as well. But it's very similar to our teaching order, but there are a few differences. But our dancers do go to their dances while they're in the class and vice versa. And although there may be 1 or 2 calls that don't coincide, they seem to do pretty well. That list has been very successful, and it gets the dancers dancing faster the way that square dancers dance after they have become experienced. We do swing-throughs early and square-throughs maybe on the 2nd or 3rd night, and it's been very successful. I just graduated September class the end of February, and it's been very successful.
Thank you, Dorothy. Again, it's your mainstream chairman, Martin Mallard. I'd like to just point out one thing, that the mainstream committee made a motion that the italicized list be dropped from further consideration. So it's not going to cause any more headaches for you.
People really, they don't know. They're having fun, so they don't know that it's going to end at any specific time as you go down the list, which is good, except if you have dancers in your area. The dancers are going to tell them. You know, they're the ones that's going to say, hey, you should be out here dancing with us, you know, and so on and so forth. In our area, that creates a problem. We can't run our classes forever and ever. Wished we could. The other thing is that California, Alaska, we're separated. We have Anchorage area and our association. Our next closest association would be Fairbanks, which is about 350 miles away of the big town. So we can do most anything. I'm sorry. George from the Kenai Association happens to be here. He is it on it. He is the association, yes, one. So we can do our list most any way we want to. We can change it around within the structure. But you don't have that problem. You have a bigger problem with the California area and all that things. I think as CALLERLAB, we have a little bit of an obligation to try and put out a list that would be a teachable list that a person could pick up and follow down. Now, I can use this list that they have here, but I've heard every caller that's got up so far has said, I take this list, but then I change it. Yeah, a little bit. Everybody said, well, a little bit. Yes, I changed a little bit. But we could do a lot of changes with this list that would put it in an order that would be usable. I don't think we're going to do that here, but we could get a committee together, surely, that's with the people we have and the expertise we have. No way. Daryl said that will satisfy everybody. No, that's true. We cannot put a list that's going to satisfy everybody, but we can put it in a better progression of teaching, because a new caller pick up this list and follow it down, right straight down the line, there's going to be some things that's going to be out of progression of teaching. And a lot of callers follow this, especially now since we're going to take this italicized out. And we already mentioned one of the callers that wrote in said, I teach right down the list. He's going to teach all those folds and all those trades and everything on one night because it's going to be right down the line, aren't they? Well, I'm not sure that's what they're talking about, not taking the italicized out. They're not anything going to be italicized. I mean, if they take it out? Question. Okay, to the other list, all right.
Yeah, the other list, not this list.
But we recommend this as teaching progression. If we recommend it as a teaching progression, we should have a sensible teaching progression. You know, and I'm sure that we could come up with a good teachable list.
Walt Cole again, and I follow right up with Vern. We do have a suggested teaching order for advanced. We have a suggested teaching order for plus. Nowhere on this, unless like Martin, my bifocals missed the line, do I see that this is a suggested teaching order. So I think it's an action that needs to be taken by this committee now to make a suggested teaching order. This meeting, whatever. Okay? Then I think we need to make a recommendation from this RAP session that we do something, either make this, label it, suggested teaching order, or develop one. Because there's nothing on here that implies, there's only an implication that this is a teaching order. And as far as italicized, it says they may be taught at a later date. Then that's judgment. Some classes move faster. Can I make a RAP motion? To get it to the general meeting. Can this RAP session make a motion to bring this to the general meeting or further action down the road? If this is a RAP session, can I make it an informal gathering at the Board of Governors and say, hey, take it back to the board? Okay.
No! Come up with one, but not the one.
Not to say that this one is it.
Hard to come up with one.
Yeah.
That would be in the context of...
If you read your mainstream report, you'll find that the last statement says that we are charged really by the committee to develop in the next year a teaching progression and a manual if possible. I don't think we're going to get it in 1 year. But I'm quite surprised because I have this list at home previously published that used to have right at the top, this is a recommended teaching list only. And I believe that having had it on, and if we go back through our motions, and I think Daryl is coming chairman, and John and myself can get together, we'll go back through our motions and find whether it is already there. And I believe it is, and we'll just reestablish it on the list. This could be a misprint. We will do it. If it is not there, then we will put it back on, because it has been in the past. I'm sure of that.
I recommend the Doc John.
This is Gordon Melton again. I didn't want to imply that their list is not good, better, or indifferent. My theory is CALLERLAB from the start was that once we have a list that you can go any place in the world and learn to dance. And my thought is that we should be able to come up with a list that everyone could more or less live with. Now, someone was saying, well, he taught the things that they were going to have. That puts as high as double whatever you're going to teach if you're teaching by the suggested order now, more or less the suggested order, in order to teach, to go with the list that they're talking about, which if their dancers are getting to dance at a quicker age, well, maybe we all should look at this, or a quicker state. I know the Santa Clara Valley has a lot better, or should I put it a different way, a little higher level dancing than you do in the other valleys around because of the population. When you get out in a smaller population like where I'm at, you don't have as many people to dance. You have an older age group normally, and it's just a little different. I'm just saying that some way we could suggest or go along with the list that, like I think CALLERLAB was made to start with, that we could dance all over the country with. That's what my thought was.
Ron Black, Los Angeles, southern Los Angeles, that is. If and when you come up with a teaching guide at CALLERLAB here, may I make a suggestion that we take like figures and put them together as family groups, such as here. We have Star Through. What is the other one we're working with, like figure, slide through. You know, if you're talking about two men doing a star through, we got a problem. Talking about two men doing a slide through, that's okay. But in basic dancing, slide through and star through are virtually one and the same. One is with, one is without hands. We have a like problem with 8 chains. Let's lump them together as a family member. We have other groups that are family oriented. Let's lump them together for teaching convenience as we go along. And I would appreciate if you guys would take a look at my teaching guide, simply because of the idea, if you change the order in which you now have it, you'll destroy my teaching guide that I have taken 2 years to write. So I'm going to submit mine and for a pattern. Appreciate it.
Walt Cooley, Pacific Grove. I think there is one thing that happens, and I don't think anyone intends it to happen, but I believe, in fact, it is occurring around the world at the very least, and that is there are a lot of associations. I've heard a lot of comments this morning about, well, as this gentleman said, we use a little bit different teaching order, or we use a lot different teaching order, and they run extremes, and I don't know whether Santa Clara is the worst extreme. I'm, as another gentleman mentioned, I'm right over the hill from Santa Clara, too, in a different association. I think there is a tendency for associations to go off and say, we're unhappy with the teaching order, so we're going to come up with our own, and they're doing it in sort of a semi-outlaw fashion. Because there's nothing from CALLERLAB, even though I don't think anyone intended it, there's nothing out from CALLERLAB which encourages it or tries to get the feedback, or maybe there is and no one has heard it. I think it's desirable but not necessary for something to come out from CALLERLAB, or maybe even to be a motion on the floor which says, one, there is a desire to improve the teaching order if improvements can be agreed upon which are warranted. And two, because of that, we encourage individual associations who wish to try alternate orders to keep their act together and let the rest of CALLERLAB know what's working and what's not, as opposed to just doing it and kind of hiding it because they know they're different from CALLERLAB, but they're going to do it anyway.
Daryl McMillan, I just want to make a comment on one of the things you said, just a clarification point. This past year, he mentioned that he didn't know if there was anything underway with CALLERLAB to try to get any feedback from these people. This past year, we have written numerous letters to callers associations all over and asked for their feedback, and we have got some. And, okay, you will. We're going to work a little harder on that, okay? But I'm not, from what I said before, I hope nobody misunderstands, I am not at all against the Santa Clara Valley frequency list or any of the others. If 51% of this body today, or, you know, they were all group voted to use the frequency list from Santa Clara, Los Angeles, wherever, and drop everything else, I can do that tomorrow. Point being, we can all do whichever we want to do. If we want to make this thing work, we can make it work. You can make something work. You can change your list one way and it'll work, and this guy can change his a little different, it'll work. Or we can all walk away from here and say, hey, this may not be perfectly what I want, but it's a very good list, and we can all do the same thing together, and it'll work better for all of us if we do that.
A add on my part to this list, the associations around the nation and overseas, when we are going through beginners classes, at a point figure it's party time. And everybody gets together and they go to everybody else's dances and they start spreading the wings of joy between clubs, visitations, and the associations get together and they sponsor big parties for the newer dancer. These dancers are coming out to these parties expecting to know how to dance at that point. And if we are deviating from the list by any great degree, I'm getting up there and calling something that Daryl's not calling, Daryl's calling something that I'm not calling at that point in the class level. If we all break at the 10-week period for a party for everybody to get them together and show them there are other people out there dancing, and they walk in and they can't dance to Daryl, then they look at me and say, well, why can't I dance? Daryl's people come up to the floor and they get up there and dance, and I call something that he hasn't taught, and they go back to look at Daryl and say, what happened? This is supposed to be party time. They're supposed to be able to dance. And if he's using the list and I'm using the list and I'm teaching something in advance of or have decided myself not to use something, then we as callers are shortchanging the dancers. So I don't see a whole big difference in this idea of a list if the list isn't being followed. Yes.
I think, gentlemen, 10 o'clock has arrived, and we have other sessions coming along. I'm surprised how fast the time went. I'd like to thank you all for attending, because it was a spur-of-the-moment type thing. Otherwise, this hall would have been empty. What I would ask you to do, if you would, if you have any further comments, put them in writing and send them to me. I would like to hear from you. I know some of you have some teaching progressions, some teaching methods, and so forth. This is going to be one of the aims of the mainstream program, and we are going to be working with the other committees as well. I know our incoming chairman has something to say.
Yeah, I forgot to say what I meant to say a while ago. I forgot to say it. Did you not get a questionnaire from me in the last 2 months? No. No. As a member, every member, subscriber, apprentice, associate should have got a questionnaire from me. Yeah, okay. But what I'm saying is, there's not a person in here that didn't have an opportunity to send in the purpose of the questionnaire. I knew I'm coming in as chairman tonight, and I don't want to get up on the stage and for the next year do what I want to do. I have no intention of doing that. I want to do what most of these people want to do. And every one of you had a chance to send in the questionnaire. Some of you did, some of you didn't. And I'm not getting on people for not doing it. But what I'm saying, we have been trying to get your information from everybody. Thank you.
Can I just have a show of hands, those that might be interested in a new teaching order? I'll give you a chance. Well, we're voting in favor right now. We'll give you a chance in a second. Okay. Those that are in favor of a new teaching order, please raise your hands. Slightly revised. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Are you in favor or against? Favor. Okay. You have that list. We have that list. The timing is, if you're talking about timing, that's how many are against? Hold it. We got to get the other side. How many are against a new teaching list? You can't vote twice. Okay, fine. We'll see what can be done.
Martin, the only comment I'd make on this thing, I don't need to write it to you. No matter what the damn color association do with the list, at the end of the certain lesson on Main Street, and my dancers from the Mexico
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that's the answer. But they can't do that.
With the Santa Clara Valley Association.
Well, now this is where CALLERLAB needs to get off their duff and do something.
Like you said, we don't do it.
Well, we need to.
Well, there's no way we can get it.
Whoever Daryl badge like this ought to have their badge taken away from them. That's what I think.
We've got more guys that don't badge.
You see what's happening.
Thank you for all you've done this year.
Well, I hope we've done something wrong. Hey, you're the guy that sent me all those bits and pieces. I had a hell of a time getting that organized. Did you? I got them all there.